The wind was screaming when she heard the thin, broken cry beneath the drifts. Pushing through the snow, she found a juvenile bobcat half buried, one hind leg twisted, breath shallow, eyes dulled by cold shock. The storm was closing fast. Rescue crews couldn't reach the area in time, and leaving meant death. So she made a choice. She sank into the snow and curled her body around the kitten, pulling it tight against her chest, using her own heat like a last flicker of fire. Minutes stretched into hours. The blizzard clawed at her back, ice crept into her gloves, and every breath felt heavier than the last. No rescue is coming. She stayed there, nearly unmoving, holding on through the long white roar until the storm finally loosened its grip. But when the wind finally eased, would she still be conscious? Would the bobcat still be warm? Stay tuned to witness a breathtaking fight for life in the heart of a Montana whiteout. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The sky over the Bitterroot Mountains was a piercing, deceptive blue, a color so bright and brittle it looked as though it might shatter if the wind struck it just right. It was a bluebird day in Montana, the kind that locals knew to treat with a healthy dose of suspicion. The temperature hovered in the single digits, but the sun, hanging high and unblinkingly clear, gave the illusion of warmth that did not exist. Eleanor Vance adjusted the strap of her snowshoes and narrowed her eyes at the horizon. At 72, Eleanor moved with the deliberate, economical grace of a woman who had spent 5 decades navigating uneven terrain. She was not a woman prone to panic or haste. Her face, mapped with the deep lines of a life spent outdoors, was framed by the gray fur of her hood, her breath pluming out in rhythmic clouds of silver steam. She was miles from the nearest paved road, deep within the property that had belonged to her and her late husband, Thomas. Since his passing 3 years ago, the silence of the cabin had sometimes felt heavy, but out here, among the lodgepole pines and the Douglas firs, the silence was a companion. It was living. Today, however, the silence felt different. It felt held, like a breath before a scream. Eleanor checked her watch. 1 p.m. The forecast had called for a pressure drop later in the evening. A standard winter system, but looking at the northern ridge, she saw the telltale bruising of the sky. A dark, indigo line thickening rapidly, swallowing the blue. The wind, previously just a whisper through the needles, began to moan low in the valley. "Time to head back," she murmured to herself, her voice sounding small against the vastness of the snow-packed valley. She turned, planting her poles to pivot, when a flash of movement caught her peripheral vision. It wasn't the sweeping shadow of a hawk or the darting sprint of a hare. It was a stumble. 50 yards down the slope, near a cluster of wind-twisted hawthorns, something small was struggling against the drifts. Eleanor's training kicked in before her conscious mind could process the image. For 30 years, she had worked as a wildlife rehabilitation specialist, nursing everything from fractured eagles to orphaned elk calves back to health. Retirement was a formality. The instinct to mend what was broken never truly retired. She deviated from her path, moving awkwardly through the deeper powder that had gathered in the lee of the hill. As she drew closer, the shape resolved into tawny fur, spotted and matted with ice. A bobcat, and a young one. A juvenile, likely born late in the previous season. The kitten was in a bad way. It was floundering, trying to climb a snowbank that should have been an effortless leap for a creature of its lineage. As Eleanor approached, the kitten ceased its struggle and collapsed onto its side, panting. The sound was thin, a broken wheeze that rattled in its small chest. Eleanor stopped 10 feet away, crouching low to reduce her silhouette. "Easy now," she whispered, her voice a low thrum. "I'm not here to hurt you." The kitten's ears were pinned back, but its eyes, usually the burning amber of wild defiance, were dull, glazed over with the apathy of hypothermia. It hissed, but the sound was weak, more air than threat. Eleanor scanned the animal quickly. The left hind leg was dragging, the paw hanging at a sickening angle. A fracture, likely from a fall or a trap, though there were no metal teeth visible. But the injury wasn't the immediate killer. The cold was. The animal was shivering violently, the tremors so intense they looked like convulsions. She scanned the tree line for a mother. Nothing. A mother bobcat would not abandon a kitten this size unless she was dead or had been driven off by a predator she couldn't fight. The snow around the kitten was undisturbed by other tracks. He was alone. The wind suddenly shrieked, a high-pitched tear in the atmosphere. Eleanor looked up. The indigo line she had seen minutes ago had become a wall of gray, rushing down the mountain face with terrifying speed. The sun was gone. The light turned flat and monochromatic. "We don't have time for introductions," Eleanor said grimly. She unslung her pack. She knew the protocol. Minimize stress, secure the limbs, warm the core. But as she reached for her thick leather handling gloves, the first wave of the storm hit. It wasn't just snow. It was ice pellets, hard and stinging, driven by a gust that nearly knocked her over. She looked at the kitten. If she left him to go get her sled or call for help, he would be dead in 20 minutes. His small body had no reserves left. She lunged forward. The kitten tried to bite, a weak snap of jaws, but Eleanor was faster. She scooped him up, her heavy canvas coat absorbing the feeble scratches. He was shockingly light, a sack of hollow bones and cold fur. "I've got you," she grunted, turning her back to the wind. But as she stood, the whiteout descended. The world simply vanished. The trees, the slope, her tracks. Everything was erased by a swirling vortex of white violence. Panic is the enemy of survival. Eleanor knew this. She stood still, the kitten clutched against her chest, and assessed her situation. The cabin was 2 miles away over uneven ground. In a whiteout, 2 miles might as well be the moon. If she walked, she would wander in circles until she fell. If she fell, she wouldn't get up. She couldn't outrun this. She had to ride it out. She remembered a depression in the earth near the hawthorns, a hollow where the roots of an overturned pine created a natural overhang. It wasn't a cabin, but it was a windbreak. She stumbled blindly toward where she remembered the tree to be, feeling with her boots rather than seeing. The wind was screaming now, a deafening roar that drowned out her own ragged breathing. She found the root ball, a dark mass in the swirling gray, and wedged herself into the hollow beneath it. It offered protection from the direct assault of the wind, but the cold was an omnipresent biting thing. She sat in the snow, curling her legs up, making herself as small as possible. The kitten in her arms had stopped shivering. That was bad. It meant his body was giving up the fight to generate heat. "No, you don't," Eleanor hissed. "Not on my watch." She unzipped her heavy parka. It was a dangerous move, exposing her own core, but she had layers of wool beneath. She adjusted the kitten, pressing his small, freezing body directly against the wool of her sweater, right over her heart. Then she remembered the emergency kit in her inner pocket. With trembling fingers, she fished out a chemical heat pack, the large, jagged kind used for back pain. She cracked it, kneading it frantically until she felt the chemical reaction begin to bloom. She didn't place it on the kitten directly. That would burn fragile skin. Instead, she tucked the heat bag between the layers of her scarf and draped it over the kitten's chest, creating a radiant oven between her body and his. She zipped her parka up over both of them, leaving only a small opening at the top for air. Now they were one organism. The hours that followed were a blur of sensory deprivation and internal noise. The storm raged with a fury that felt personal, piling snow over the root ball, sealing them into a pocket of ice. Inside the coat, it was a different world. It was the world of the heartbeat. Eleanor focused on the rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. Her own heart was steady, slow. Against her ribs, she felt the rapid, fluttery beat of the wild cat. It was irregular at first, skipping beats, terrifyingly slow for a feline. She began to talk, not to the cat, but to the dark. "You know," she whispered, her chin tucked down so her warm breath pooled inside the coat. "Thomas used to say these storms were the mountains sweeping the floor, getting rid of the dust." She felt the kitten shift. A small, cold nose pressed against her neck. He was seeking the source of the heat. "He would have liked you," she continued, her voice hitching slightly. "He had a soft spot for the fighters. And you're a fighter, aren't you?" The cold began to seep through her pants, through the specialized mats of her boots. It was an insidious, numbing weight. Eleanor wiggled her toes, clenched her thigh muscles. Keep the blood moving. She thought of the rescue crews. They wouldn't come. Not in this. The sheriff knew she was capable. He wouldn't risk his deputies until the winds died down. She was on her own. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes in a snowstorm. It is the feeling of being the only living thing in a dead universe. Eleanor had felt this loneliness every day for the last 3 years, sitting in her empty living room. But here, buried in the snow, she oddly didn't feel it. She had a job to do. The kitten let out a sound, not a hiss, but a low, vibrating purr. It was rough and hitching, likely a self-soothing mechanism for pain, but it resonated through Eleanor's chest. "That's it," she soothed, closing her eyes. "You tell me all about it." Time distorted. She drifted into a half-sleep, the dangerous kind where the cold starts to feel like a warm blanket. In her mind, she was back in the kitchen with Thomas, the smell of coffee and wood smoke in the air. He was laughing, pointing out the window at a jay stealing seeds. "Look at him, Elle. Cheeky little devil. Life wants to live, doesn't it?" Eleanor jolted awake. Her chin had dropped to her chest. The kitten was squirming. The heat pack was fading, but the kitten's body temperature had risen. He was radiating his own heat now, a small furnace fueled by her warmth. She checked the opening of her coat. It was pitch black outside. Night had fallen. The roar of the wind had changed pitch, dropping from a scream to a low, mournful howl. "We made it through the worst," she whispered, stroking the tufted ears through the fabric of her scarf. Then she heard it. Outside their snow cave, over the sound of the wind, there was a crunch. The distinct compression of heavy paws on packed snow. Eleanor froze. A coyote? A wolf? A mountain lion? The crunching stopped right outside the root ball. She held her breath, her hand instinctively moving to the knife on her belt, though she knew her frozen fingers would struggle to unclasp it. There was a snuffling sound, deep, resonant. A heavy exhale that she could feel vibrating through the snow packed around them. The kitten in her jacket went rigid. He didn't hiss, he didn't growl. He simply stopped moving. Eleanor waited for the digging to start. She waited for the jaws to break through their fragile shelter. But nothing happened. The presence lingered for what felt like an eternity. A heavy, breathing sentinel in the dark. And then, the footsteps moved away. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Fading into the storm. Eleanor let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She didn't sleep again. She held the kitten tighter, acting as the anchor keeping his small soul tethered to the earth. Morning broke with a silence so profound it rang in the ears. Eleanor pushed her way out of the snowdrift. The world had been scrubbed clean. The sun was back, the sky that same innocent blue, as if the violence of the night had never happened. She was stiff, her joints screaming in protest, but she was alive. She checked the snow around the root ball. The fresh powder had filled in most tracks, but there were faint depressions, large, round, and heavy, circling the spot where she had slept. Too wide for a coyote, too round for a wolf. She didn't linger. The kitten needed fluids. The trek back to the cabin was a brutal 2-hour slog through waist-deep drifts. Eleanor didn't stop. She ran on adrenaline and the specific, narrow focus of the medic. When she finally kicked the snow off her boots in her mudroom, the cabin greeting her with the residual warmth of the wood stove, she nearly collapsed. But she didn't. She went straight to the hospital room, a converted pantry she kept stocked for exactly this purpose. She placed the kitten in a large dog crate lined with heating pads set to low. Now, in the light, she could see the damage clearly. He was emaciated, his ribs sharp ridges under the fur. The leg was swollen, the tibia fractured but the skin unbroken. A green stick fracture, common in young bones. It would heal, but it needed stabilization. Eleanor went to work. She moved with the efficiency of a woman who had done this 1,000 times. She mixed a rehydration solution, warm water, electrolytes, a touch of sugar. She donned thick leather gloves and used a towel to restrain the kitten, who had regained enough strength to realize he was in the terrifying belly of a human dwelling. I know, she murmured, dodging a swipe of claws. I'm the monster. Drink this. She used a syringe to trickle the fluid into the side of his mouth. He swallowed, hesitantly at first, then greedily. For the next 3 days, Eleanor existed in a state of suspended reality. The roads were blocked, the phone lines were down. It was just her and the wild cat. She splinted the leg using padded tongue depressors and vet wrap, a temporary fix until the bone could knit enough to bear weight. She fed him tiny slivers of venison liver and raw chicken hearts, rich in taurine and fat. She was careful. This was the most critical part of rehabilitation, the refusal to tame. She spoke little. She avoided eye contact. She touched him only when necessary for medical treatment. He was not a pet. He was a creature of the pines, and to turn him into a beggar for human affection would be a death sentence. Yet, there was a bond. She could feel it. When she sat in the armchair in the evenings, reading by the fire, the kitten would watch her from the crate. His eyes, now clear and bright amber, tracked her movements. He didn't hiss anymore when she entered the room. He simply watched, a quiet acknowledgement of the truce between species. Eleanor found herself talking to Thomas again. "He's got your appetite, Tom," she said on the fourth night, chopping liver. "And your stubbornness. Tried to bite through the splint today." She realized with a start that she wasn't just keeping the kitten alive. The kitten was keeping her awake. For 3 years, she had been sleepwalking through her days, waiting for the end. Now she was measuring doses, checking humidity, watching the sky. She had a purpose. The weight on her chest that she had carried since the funeral felt lighter, displaced by the immediate need of another life. By the 7th day, the snow had settled. The county plows had cleared the main road, and the silence of the valley was broken by the occasional distant engine. The kitten, Eleanor had refused to name him, calling him only Little One in her head, was pacing. The splint held firm, and he was putting weight on the leg. His belly was round, his coat groomed and glossy. He was ready. To keep him longer would be to risk habituation. The window for release was narrow. Eleanor felt a pang of sorrow so sharp it almost doubled her over. She packed the crate with a heavy heart. She wrestled the snarling, energetic bundle of fur into the carrier, ignoring the scratches he left on her wrists. "That's right," she whispered, fighting back tears. "You hate me. That's good. Hate me and stay alive." She strapped the carrier to her sled and donned her snowshoes. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping toward the western peaks, casting the world in a warm, golden glow, the stark opposite of the blue death of a week ago. She towed the sled back to the hawthorns, back to the place where she had found him. The air was still. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. Eleanor reached the spot. She set the carrier down in the snow. She knelt, her knees sinking into the white powder. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "Go be a ghost, little one." She unlatched the door and stepped back. The kitten hesitated. He sniffed the air, the cold rush of the forest filling his lungs. Then he shot out of the carrier. He didn't run far. He sprinted 10 yards, then stopped atop a fallen log. He turned back. For a singular suspended moment, the bobcat looked directly at the woman. His ears twitched. There was no fear in his posture, only recognition. Then a sound broke the stillness. A low, guttural chuff came from the tree line. Eleanor froze. From the shadows of the pines, a shape emerged. It was massive for a female, her winter coat thick and luxurious, her ear tufts high and regal. The mother bobcat. She didn't look at the kitten. She looked straight at Eleanor. Behind her, 2 other shapes materialized, siblings, slightly larger than the injured one, watching with wide, curious eyes. The injured kitten let out a high-pitched yowl and scrambled off the log, dashing toward the mother. He rubbed his face against her flank, purring so loudly Eleanor could hear it from where she stood. The mother bent her head, licking the top of his head vigorously, checking him, smelling the human scent on him and, miraculously, accepting it. But then, the mother did something that stopped Eleanor's heart. She stepped away from her kittens and took 3 deliberate steps toward Eleanor. This was wrong. Wild animals run. They don't approach. The mother bobcat stopped 15 feet away. She lowered her head, her gaze locking with Eleanor's. There was an intelligence in those eyes that transcended biology. Eleanor looked at the tracks in the snow around the mother's feet. They were the same large, round depressions she had seen outside her snow cave the morning after the storm. The realization hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. The mother hadn't abandoned the kitten. She had been there. She had been tracking them. She had stood guard outside that root ball all night in the howling wind, listening to the heartbeat of her child against the heartbeat of the human. She could have killed Eleanor in the dark. She could have tried to take the kitten back, but she hadn't. She had trusted the warmth. She had outsourced the survival of her kin to the only creature capable of providing it. The mother bobcat held Eleanor's gaze for 1 second longer. A slow blink, a universal sign of trust in the feline world, and then turned. She let out a soft command. The family unit, whole once more, melted into the pines. They didn't run. They vanished, swallowed by the forest as if they had never existed. Eleanor stood alone in the clearing. The sun was setting now, setting the snow on fire with hues of apricot and rose. The light was warm, bathing the valley in a gentle, forgiving radiance. She looked at the empty carrier. Then she looked at her hands. They were weathered, scarred, and trembling, but they were strong. They were useful. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the old photo of Thomas she always carried. She looked at his smiling face, then up at the empty tree line where the cats had disappeared. "You were right, Tom," she spoke aloud, and her voice was steady, strong. "Life wants to live." She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp, pine-scented air. It didn't burn anymore. It tasted sweet. Eleanor Vance strapped the empty carrier back onto the sled. She turned toward her cabin, toward the warm light spilling from its windows in the distance. She had a lot of work to do. The fence needed mending, the bird feeders needed filling, and spring was coming. She wasn't just a widow waiting for the winter to end anymore. She was part of the forest. She was a guardian, and she was, finally, entirely alive. The wind picked up, just a gentle breeze, blowing the tracks away, leaving the snow smooth and unbroken, ready for the next story to be written.